These are the standard official teachings of the Orthodox Church that I find problematic. Are you ready?
Yep.
Here we go. Number 1, praying to saints and icon veneration. The Orthodox Church says it's a fine practice to pray to the saints, create pictures of them, which they call icons, place them in their churches and homes, and then bow down to them, kiss them, and pray to them. But we don't see that practice in the days of the apostles, nor in the Old Testament. There are no records of the apostles bowing down to a picture of Abraham, kissing it, or praying to it. In fact, to do that would be a violation of the second of the 10 Commandments, which says, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them." What is forbidden is not the images per se, but the bowing down to or serving of these images. For there were God-prescribed images of cherubims, and in the tabernacle curtains there was palm trees and things like that.
Oh, that's interesting, because when people kind of are too forceful on this point about not making any sort of images, I always think like, well, what about the cherubim and stuff like that? It can't just be an all-time blanket rule. So okay, I'm glad he pointed that out.
That's true too, because if you actually read Joshua chapter 6 or Joshua chapter 7 verse 6 to 8, Joshua actually bows down to the ark as well, which has icons on it, which is interesting because he said you can't bow down to them ever. So according to him, Joshua would have to be committing some sort of blasphemy there.
All right, let's see. I'll continue the point here.
That representing the Garden of Eden. But it'd be wrong for a person to start bowing down to those images of those palm trees or those cherubim and to pray to them. Having pictures in church was actually not a universal practice in the early church. It was largely not done. Even some regional councils, like the Council of Elvira, forbid it, saying, Canon 36, "Pictures are not to be placed in churches so that they do not become objects of worship and adoration." Yet in Orthodox churches, this is practiced. In the Confession of Dositheus, which is accepted by the Orthodox Church, it says, "Now we adore the saints and the holy icons." The Second Council of Nicaea, which is also accepted by the Orthodox Church, and even is considered infallible by them, made a decree, quote, "We salute the venerable images. We place under anathema those who do not do this." It goes on to describe requiring both saluting and kissing the image, and have a strong desire towards it. And how that council defined what an anathema is, it says, quote, "An anathema is nothing short than complete separation from God." So something that is forbidden in the Bible, and not a universal practice of the earliest Christians, this council, which the Orthodox Church accepts, says you are separate from God if you do not salute and bow down and kiss these images. That's completely undermining God's word. Number 2.
Can we maybe address some of these? So a couple things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a couple things, a lot to unpack here. So first of all, so the first council he references is a local council. And the reason why it's just never good to cite a local council as inherently authoritative is because there was plenty of councils that were heretical. So for example, in the end of the 4th century, there was councils that were Arian councils that deemed that Christ was a creature. They had hundreds of bishops present. And so for us in the Orthodox paradigm, that which is binding is that which is found in the ecumenical councils, and that's going to be Nicaea II, which is the one that he referenced. There's a couple passages throughout both the New Testament and the Old Testament that would demonstrate that just because someone is bowing doesn't mean that it's inherently going to be worship. So actually in Revelation 3:9, it says this, says, "Indeed, I will make," and it's Yahweh speaking, "I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews but are not, but lie. Indeed, I will make them come down and prostrate before your feet and know that I have loved you." So he's saying that he's going to make, these this reprobate people, he's going to actually make them bow down to the saints. So if that's worship just to bow down, then it would mean that God is actually prescribing idolatry here. The same thing happens, like Nick already referenced in Joshua 7, and then also in 1 Samuel 25, Abigail bows before David. So it's very clear that just because someone might bow does not mean that it's inherently going to be worship and therefore idolatry, because the commandment in question needs to be read in its entirety, and it's saying that you cannot worship these images, and that so bowing can be worship, but it's not always worship. And then finally, he erroneously stated that the early church did not do this. That's false. We have found in the Roman catacombs there are images even with intercessory prayers written, and then also Saint Dionysius, who is literally found in the book of Acts, he explicitly writes in favor of the veneration of icons. And Craig Truglia has a great paper that's been peer reviewed that defends his authenticity. And then Michael Garton has an excellent book that lays out all of the early icons, really from the first century, dating all the way up till Nicaea II, and I believe even later than that. So, so a lot to unpack there. I hope that I hit all the wickets.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Oh yeah. I just had and then Nick, maybe you can touch on this, and then whatever you're going to bring up. So as far as icons, so you kind of have two issues. One that I don't know if you call it. So you're saying you wouldn't regard this as worship. What you're doing with icons, it's not worship.
Yeah, so there's a distinction called the latria dulia distinction, and it's the distinction between veneration and worship. So we would say that worship is only given to God. Veneration, which is just honor, is given to all of the saints, and the saints via the icons and the angels as well.
And when you are like people describe it as praying to saints, other people as seeking intercession of saints or something like that, how do you describe that?
Yeah, so we would say that we can call it prayer, but it's a distinct type of prayer that is different than the way we pray to God. So we would say it's an intercessory prayer. So all that means is like it's akin to me asking Nick over here to pray for me, because we believe that the saints are alive, and it talks about this throughout the scriptures. It talks about how the prayers of that which is a person who is more righteous than you. So like in Job 42, for example, Job actually offers a sacrifice on behalf of his wicked friends. And because Job was righteous, the sacrifice is accepted. So we believe that someone that is more righteous, their prayer is actually more powerful. And it talks about this in James 5, verses 14 through 16 as well. It actually explicitly says that the prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. And so, we would just say that because the saints are alive, as we see throughout the book of Revelation, they're alive, they're conscious of things happening in the world. It's really no different than us just asking, someone to pray for us, except in this case, it is a righteous saint that we're asking. So it'd be kind of like, for you, David, or all the Protestants watching, it'd be like if you saw Paul walking around, like you would probably walk up to him and you would ask him for things. And guess what? It would be baked into that request that whatever you ask of him is coming from Christ. So we all understand that like the things we ask for from saints, it's all coming from Christ. But we don't have to clarify that every time we say it. Sometimes we do in our prayers, but it's baked into the request, just like it would be if you ran up to Paul, who was walking around, and asked him for something.
Now, I don't even know like if this is an official Catholic position, but I'm wondering what your guys' position on this, because this was way back in college. I was in a philosophy class, and there was a priest in the philosophy class, and he was, I don't remember how we got on the subject, but I asked if you're talking to Mary, I said, do you believe that she's like omnipresent or that she's omniscient? Like, how would she be hearing all whatever people are saying to her around the world? And he said that what he believes is that if you say something, he didn't think that she's omniscient or omnipresent or something like this. He believes that God actually conveys what you're saying to her, and then if she wants to intercede for you, she can. So do you guys believe something like that? Because you just mentioned that you believe the saints are aware of things that are happening on earth. Like, are they aware of what everyone is saying, or does God convey that or something?
Yeah, so like in the same way in the Gospels, it talks about how the angels in heaven, they rejoice at anyone who repents. Well, it doesn't mean that the angels are necessarily omnipresent, right? It just means that God is able to convey that to them. So in the same way, like when we ask for intercession of these saints, again, this is going to be God just conveying to them these prayers, or allowing them to hear these prayers rather. And so we see this with both the angels and the saints in heaven, that God allows them both to hear that, but we don't think there's any sort of like, omnipresent in the sense that God is or something like that.
And just one quick additional thought on that. So you have two issues. You have asking saints for intercession, talking to saints or something like that. But then you have the addition of the icon. So what's the? I mean, you could talk to a saint, and God could convey that message without the icon. So what's the purpose of the icon? Is that like to keep you focused on it or something?
Yeah, that's one of the primary focuses. So what we would say is that we reference icons as actually being windows into heaven. And we would actually say that the Second Council of Nicaea is Christological in the sense that when Christ took on flesh, he actually consecrated matter. And so icons are a reflection of that because matter is itself been consecrated. It's actually holy. And so through that, then that's where we get icons as sort of our visual representation, our window into heaven to make our intercessory prayers and then our prayers to God as well, because we have icons, of course, of Christ.
All right, then Nick, you had other stuff to add?
Yeah, I was just going to simply say that I was going to say the same exact thing, is that they're windows to heaven. And so in the same way, like it's out of, honor and remembrance of these people. In the same way you might have, a picture of your relative in your house. Obviously, it's not going to be to the same degree because you're not going to be, honoring them in that same way. But we're honoring these people as they have fallen. We're honoring them. They have fallen. They have did what Paul says, which is endure until the end. And so since they've endured until the end, we honor them, and we believe that they can actually help intercede for us. And when we see this all through the Gospels as well, that the people that have passed away are actually still able to communicate in some sense. We see this in the story of Lazarus and the rich man, where the rich man tells Abraham, he says, hey, can you go down and tell these people for me? Tell them to stop doing what they're doing. And so they're aware of what's happening on earth, and they even want to intercede. Now, obviously, the rich man, he was in Hades, so he wasn't, in any sort of righteous state. So he wasn't obviously going to be receiving prayers or anything like that. But we see that when we die, we're not dead, right? We're still alive in heaven. And for those who obviously died and are not Christians, they would be in Hades. But that's a distinction we make.
Do you guys know his name? His channel's Needs God. Do you know his name? I don't want to call. I don't know.
I think it's Ryan. I think it's Ryan.
It is Ryan. You're right. You're right. It is Ryan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Ryan was citing Vatican II, and it sounded there like if you're not
Nicaea II. Nicaea II.
Yeah. Let's see. What did I say?
You said Vatican.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. My brain is fried, guys. So Nicaea II. It sounded like you're cursed or anathema or whatever it is if you don't do this with the icons. So is that correct?
Yeah. So anathema means that you're cut off from the. For us, when the councils talk about anathema, it's that you're cut off from the source of salvation. And so if you were to deny icons, and you would be cut off from the source of salvation. Again, the normative means, and again, the reason why is because what the council argued is that those that were doubting icons were denying the incarnation. That was the justification. So for us to deny icons is to deny the incarnation, which is why it's rightly Nicaea II, whereas Nicaea I directly dealt with the incarnation. We would say that Nicaea II follows from that. And so that's why it's something that you must hold to in order to be within the bounds of the church.
How would what's the connection there? Like, you can obviously believe God entered creation as Jesus of Nazareth and died for sins without believing in an icon. So so a lot of this goes back to different paradigms. So because this is something that was prescribed very early on in the church, so we would say, again, we would reference Saint Dionysius, who was literally a disciple of Saint Paul. And he's explicitly writing that it's impossible to fully grasp the heavenly without something material in order to grasp it. So in other words,
it's basically impossible to truly grasp the fullness of the incarnation without iconography. That's essentially what the church's teaching was from the earliest days. And so a lot of this goes back to differences of church authority. So we would say that the church prescribed this as a method, and it is in the best interest of the Christian because this is edifying, it furthers their Christian life. And so if you deny it, then you are missing out on the fullness of the faith. And yeah, I would say this sounds difficult to understand from a Protestant perspective, but you have to understand these are different paradigms. We start with the church authority and what they prescribe for your salvation, whereas the Protestant obviously does not start with that starting point. So it sounds crazy to a Protestant that's just hearing it for the first time, but once you start to unpack the writings of the fathers on the topic of icons, this stuff starts to make sense. Once you start to unpack the arguments of the iconoclasts and why they rejected icons, it starts to make sense as to why, okay, this does seem like something that's necessary to grasp the fullness of the incarnation.
Yeah, we have to understand too, like the people that believe this are the same people that are literally put together the Bible in the first place, right? And so this is not like us just taking from just random people, right? We believe that the people that believe this, the teachings that we take from are the same teachings of the people that put together the Bible. And so to us, it makes no sense to hold to someone's teachings about them putting together the Bible, but not put together their other teachings or not hold to their other teachings that they make. For us, it's okay if we're going to hold to their teachings, we're going to hold to their teachings in its entirety in the sense of in the consensus of them.
But so take someone, because you mentioned like how this would sound weird to Protestants. So take someone like Ryan here, and I'm guessing his thinking would be along the lines of if you're saying this is like you're cursed if you don't do this, seems like it should have been kind of a big issue, not just here's a possible defense of this, like in the New Testament, as far as like people being aware of what's going on earth or something like that. But like, seems like it should be emphasized, like, if you got the Ethiopian eunuch and he's converting or something like this, it should be, make sure you get these icons because it's not going to work very well if you don't have them. In other words, you should kind of see that like all over the place. So is it something that like happened later, but then once it happened, it was essential, or was it already essential? And every time, like when thousands of people convert at the preaching of Peter, then, it's not mentioned, but all the, these people would have been told, hey, get your icons.
Well, we believe that it was always, you can go ahead, Luigi, if you want.
Okay. Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, I would say that that's an argument from silence. I would say there's a lot of things that, aren't mentioned in various of those passages that would still say, are crucial. So like, for example, like when St. Paul says, to be saved, you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. Well, there's a lot of things that the Protestant is going to extrapolate upon that verse, such as like the doctrine of the Trinity and maybe sola fide and all these other things. But that's not what St. Paul says in the verse, right? He just says you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead and you're saved. That's it. But that's not what most Protestants believe. So there is an extrapolation on these doctrines that we see that within church history, and we see these things become more defined. We would reject any sort of development, but what we would say is that the doctrines got more defined as they became called into question. So like in the same way that with the First Council of Nicaea, the church always believed that Christ was uncreated and consubstantial with the Father, but it wasn't until it got called into question that then they had to call the council to actually address this heresy. So we would say that we would actually argue that the reason it took so long, that's actually evidence of it being a regular practice for so long, because it took that long for it really truly to be called into question at a large scale. That's how universal it was in the early church, that it took over 700 years for it to even be called into question as a doctrine, because that's how much the churches were doing it. And you actually see this even in like the Jewish synagogues. The Dura Europa, which there was a synagogue and a church in the same town that was found from around the 3rd century, 4th century time frame. And it's just like completely decked out in icons. And so you can see this is, and again, I referenced the Roman catacombs earlier. So we would say that this was a very early practice. literally like at the same time that the apostles would walk around, this was already being done. And then as soon as the apostles, were received into heaven, when they reposed, everybody already recognized that they were to ask them for intercessory prayers, which is why they're writing them below their icons in the Roman catacombs. So we would say that this was very early a universal practice.
Anything else to add on this point?
I think you did perfect.
All right. Again, we'll take a couple of super chats in between to see